Hello? Yeah, hello there, mate. Yeah, just calling over because I want you to let you know about something. Yeah, just come on over. I'll let you know about it in person. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Love you too. I know. All right. Bye. Bye. Uh, ah. Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. I've talked about many great bands across these many episodes: Black Sabbath, the Beatles, the Alan Parsons Project, yes, but one band that I think deserves a little bit of a dabbling in this little show of mine is none other than the Who. First established in the mid '60s in the wake of many successful bands of the British invasion, bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Kinks, the Who were basically among that kind of group and that kind of era. However, just like those bands, the Who would develop something of a slow, ambitious approach to some of their work. What with albums and hit singles such as My Generation, A Quick One, Happy Jack, and The Who Sells Out. But by the dawn of the 60s, by 1969, they released what may be considered one of the greatest rock albums of all time. A little album called Tommy. And it was this album that popularized the term rock opera, a kind of concept album that kind of had themes, but also had something of a strong narrative going on. In this case, being about the titular deaf, dumb, and blind boy as he tries to communicate with the rest of the world and eventually being seen as this almost messiah-like god-esque figure. And needless to say, it was very successful with some hit singles, selling records, and it definitely put The Who on the map. So much so that they decided to continue this by making a similar concept album, a spiritual successor or follow-up, if you will, to Tommy, one that would be called Lifehouse. And with a title like that, assuming that houses usually have life in them many ways, it's almost like naming an album Death Coffin or something, I don't know. But needless to say, like Tommy, this too would be an ambitious project. If not a little bit too ambitious. The main writer of the song, Pete Townshend, had a lot of opportunity and a lot of focus on this album, but it just kind of proved too much for the overall band. The themes and the so-called story were getting a bit too complicated. It was getting a bit too much to be just a mere double album, let alone any kind of album in particular. And needless to say, the whole idea was scrapped altogether, and the Who decided to start again from scratch, but not entirely dispose all the songs they've written so far. The album we're looking at today is basically the final product of that. Half the songs of Lifehouse would eventually find their way into this album, while the other half would find their light in other albums from there on. And that album was simply called Who's Next. While the final cut of the album may have its songs scrambled around, like mixed up and whatnot, and half the songs have been kind of kicked out, you still kind of get a sense of the overall story and the overall premise of what this album could have been. And that kind of goes off right away from the first track of this album, Baba O'Reilly. Named after the Indian guru philosopher Meher Baba and minimalist music composer Terry Riley, this song begins with that simple, jittery, and yet so iconic and familiar keyboard riff. It's like whenever you hear that thing, you instantly think of The Who and you instantly think of just great music overall. And it only just builds up from there with that those awesome piano chords that kick in. You know you're in for an awesome rock and roll track. It is a good demonstration of how they transitioned from the 60s into the 70s. Not just The Who as a music band, but also just rock music in general. And keeping with and since this was written as part of the Lifehouse rock opera, some of the lyrics in it do tell something of a bit of a scenario. The song focuses on a Scottish farmer named Ray who encourages his family to go with him, to leave their home, to move to another part of the country, and how they should just ignore these these people, or like pieces of rubbish that are like scattered across this vast green field, telling them to not cry and that it's just only a teenage wasteland. And in fact, this was partially inspired by the Who's experience in a festival in the Isle of Wight, where after their gig, they saw over the field and they seen nothing but rubbish, junk, and garbage that the crowd and the audience have pretty much left behind. And yeah, it seemed to be a good representation of that kind of scenario. So in a way, this song doesn't exactly celebrate teenage rebellion, but rather deconstructs it. And then it comes to the climax of the song, where we get an awesome violin solo from Dave Arbus of East of Eden, and it is a kicking finale with that violin. It almost gives us this almost Arabian, Middle Eastern kind of feel to it, almost like something out of Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. And then it culminates in this sped up climax, for lack of a better word, where it just kind of where it and the percussion kind of speed up into a rolling ending, and it just kind of ends, and you would feel this sense of energy and rush to it, and in a way you feel overall satisfaction. And even if you're not in it for the overall album, you'd be in it for the song. It is no wonder this was one of the most famous songs from The Who, and if you haven't heard of The Who and you wanted to get into them, this song alone is worth recommending. Next is Bargain. This one too kind of continues on that fluid and awesome mix of guitars, synth, and percussion that Barbara O'Reilly managed to accomplish. And just like that one, this one features verses sung by Peter Daltrey and a bridge by Pete Townshend himself, who wrote most of the songs for this album, if not the whole concept of Lifehouse. This one, in terms of its lyrics, seemed to be a conventional and typical love song at first glance, wanting to give up everything the singer has for this person. However, given the context of everything else, this may not be just a normal average love song, but rather a song about yearning for enlightenment, reaching out to God or some kind of high source or high deity of some kind. And in the bits where they have those acoustic guitars is nothing short but sweet and brilliant. And around the last minute of the song, Keith Moon's percussions really shine through. They just rubble at the core of the heart and down in the entrails. Just simple. It goes to show how you could speak a whole other language just from percussion alone. This is another great song by The Who, and to be fair, any song by The Who could be considered at least good, and this is just no exception. In fact, Townshend himself said that this was one of his favourite, if not his most favourite song of this album alone. And after listening to it, I could see why. It is a beautiful balance of rock and electronic elements, and I wished more rock bands nowadays kind of dabbled this kind of approach. Or I think this kind of music would do well for other up and coming new indie bands who are willing to experiment with these different kind of instruments and these kind of styles. Something like this could really show how different music can lead to different risks and new different ideas. Then we have Love Ain't for Keeping, one of the few songs of the album to not utilize any keyboards or synthesizers at all, and also the shortest song of the album at about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. This is one where the guitars do really take over in this respect. It almost gives off a kind of western country folk kind of feeling, not only with its music but also in some of its lyrics as well. Kind of paint this picture of a man and his family kind of driving down this long road through these like rural countrysides and fields and everything, while lamenting over how everything has kind of changed. World's being this far off future world being polluted, and and everything's kind of forbidden or tabooed or whatnot, and how the world just needs a bit of love and peace, and telling his wife, his lover, to lay beside him, and that, well, love ain't for keeping. It's for sharing and giving to other people, especially those who need it more than most. And that kind of theme does of course fit into the overall concept of Lifehouse, much like how Bargains kind of delves into man's relationship with God or deity of sorts. And in a way, it still kind of proves that even with these songs kind of scrummed up, you still kind of get the overall themes and ideas that Pete tried to express through the Lifehouse opera. And his acoustic guitars are just sweet, and Roger Dolly's vocals do help emphasize that kind of rural feeling to them. The bluesiness of Bargain then segues into the next song, My Wife. The only song to not be written as part of the Lifehouse project, this one was written entirely by the bassist, John Entwistle, or good old Thunderfingers himself. This is definitely the song where he takes the spotlight, not only playing his signature bass, but also taking on the lead vocals, the piano, and even a whole brass session. Impressive, I know. Not only do we have the strings of Barbara O'Reilly, but the brass of My Wife. What could be better than that? Anyways, while this wasn't exactly written as part of Lighthouse, some of its lyrics could still in some way fit the overall scenario and the overall setting of that kind of far off futuristic world. It's more of a dark comedic kind of song about a man who's been drunk so much that he's been found by police and kind of put in like some kind of contemporary jail or whatnot. And he's kind of been put there for like a few days since like the weekend or something after his hangover. And now as he's kind of coming over from his hangover, he starts to grow more paranoid of what his wife will think of him. Not only out drinking like a madman, but also thinking that he might be cheating on her with another woman or whatnot. And he's just trying to come up with so many ways and excuses to protect himself from his possibly bizarre imagery that I think in some way could at least fit the the post-apocalyptic setting of Lighthouse, with what with them wearing life suits, everything kind of stuck indoors and trying to having to see through virtual reality and just kind of coming up with these far off fantasy things that we can only visualize through our imaginations. This could very well just be interpreted as one of these kind of virtual reality fantasies being made up by this one guy, and he's so into it, he's so immersed in it that he starts to think it's actual reality, and he might think his wife is actually out to get him or not. It, it may be coincidence and it may not be intentional, but it's something I how I'd say it, something I like to interpret. My, my interpretation may not be the right one or the perfect one, but it's still something I think might seem interesting. Then we close out side one of the album with The Song Is Over. And while the song may be the end of side one for Who's Next, in terms of Lifehouse, this was intended to be the closing finale to the album overall. In terms of the overall context of the story, this entire concert or gig called Lifehouse, this band or musicians have discovered this one note that could bring all of people into this universal harmony and bring them into this higher plane of enlightenment and existence. And so they all have, except for one person, for one character, who sings this kind of this almost melancholic yet very hopeful lullaby of a track that kind of feeling of yearning and kind of optimism for the future. And that kind of feeling is emphasized by the music, the very downward pianos and synths, as well as the encouraging guitars and the drum and bass riffs. And here, the verses were sung by Pete Townshend, who gives off this kind of kind of almost sadness to his voice. This loss of hope that he's been left behind and left abandoned. But then Roger Daltrey comes in with the chorus, and how he'll sing to the high mountains, to the far off spaces, and just to the free. How he'll carry on this message of love and hope, peace, truth, and justice. And overall, this song, among many others, goes to show how music can be and is powerful. It's both socially and spiritually. And I think the story of Lifehouse, and to a lesser extent Tommy and Quadrophenia, is a good example of a story that kind of delves into this kind of theme, this kind of belief of how capable music can be to enriching people's lives. In fact, I kind of wonder if it would make a different impact, if not a better one, if this song and Won't Get Fooled Again were kind of swapped around. If Won't Get Fooled Again was the ending to side 1 and The Song Is Over was the ending to side 2. And as much as I love Won't Get Fooled Again, and trust me, I will talk about that song soon enough, but considering how The Song Is Over is kind of about resolution and just hope and optimism, while Won't Get Fooled Again is just the deconstruction of teenage rebellion, I kind of wonder if the impact by that little track swap would make a better impact or not.